Welcome into the Wire on Fantasy Football Podcast. We are on episode 26. As you can see, my partner Brian is not here, but as our intro always normally goes, I'm your monotone master. Brian is our fantasy foreseer. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at WireWrongFFB and also on Twitter as YourWrongFFB. But today we're going to be continuing our deep dive into the divisions, looking at our first NFC division today, and it's going to be the NFC East. So the NFC East is the Washington football team, the Philadelphia Eagles, the Dallas Cowboys, and the New York Giants. Now to dive into some impactful news going on in the NFL right now. So the current update on Aaron Rodgers is that he has turned down a contract that would have made him the highest paid player. Him and Davante Adams put out a cryptic tweet of a picture of Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. No one really knows what's happening. Also, in that news, Davante Adams has stopped his contract negotiating terms with Green Bay, almost as if he also wants to leave Green Bay if Aaron Rodgers also leaves Green Bay. So that's going to be an interesting situation to watch play out over the next handful of weeks before the season starts. In terrible news, superstar breakout running back Cam Akers has now been lost due to a ruptured Achilles. He'll be out for the entire season. What was going to be an amazing fantasy season for him is now just lost to injury. Darrell Henderson is the next man up on the roster, but Darrell Henderson is not a 3-down workhorse back. He's a little bit smaller, a little bit more of a pass-catching kind of role. For example, they drafted Darrell Henderson and then realized that Darrell Henderson was not going to be the full answer to Todd Gurley, so then they drafted Cam Akers after. So most likely they will be adding some sort of veteran or free agent presence in a few weeks to add to pair with Darrell Henderson. I don't think the Rams will give Darrell Henderson the full 3-down workload because he's not built for that. Another battle that we're going to have to monitor is the Broncos quarterback battle. The Broncos have said that the quarterback starting role between Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater is going to take all 3 preseason games to finally decide what they're going to do, which is just going to be frustrating because I feel like if for fantasy, you really want Teddy Bridgewater to take over because we saw him support DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson with a full 1,000-yard seasons last year. And with Drew Lock at the helm last year, we didn't really get much production from Jerry Jeudy or Noah Fant. Jerry Jeudy had the most targets thrown to him that were deemed uncatchable. So that's Drew Lock in a nutshell. The way people viewed Mitch Trubisky over the past few years is I feel like the way people view Drew Lock right now at the moment. Another battle to watch in the Broncos is going to be the running back position battle between second-round rookie Javonte Williams out of UNC. Could potentially be stealing the spot from Melvin Gordon. I think it's a situation that I don't know if I really want either, especially if Drew Lock's going to be the quarterback. It's going to be a position that's going to have a starting role, and you might not be able to figure out who's going to have that starting role going into the season. And I'm going to have to wait and see over the next few weeks to see if there's a little bit more clarity on the situation. But if the season started tomorrow, I don't think I'd want either Broncos quarterback or Broncos running back in my team at the moment. Some other bad news is Saquon Barkley is unsure of when he can fully return to practice. Everyone kind of knew he was still coming off his injury. Everyone expected him to have a slow start to the season. But with this timeline, he should be able to be ready for week 1. But he's going to get off to a slow start. And where he is in the first round in drafts, there's other valuable running backs around Saquon that aren't injured and are not going to get off the slow starts. So it's one of those situations where Saquon might tumble down later into the back end of the first round. I still think he's going to go in the first round. But there's some running backs I'd rather have besides him because getting off to a strong start, getting those first few wins on your fantasy team is very important. Just making sure that you have an idea of how you want to look at the rest of your season going on instead of having to worry about what you have to do with your team to make sure that you can turn it around and win so you're not out of playoffs to start the season instantly. Some good news is Dak Prescott has been cleared to practice in full. I mean, if you guys remember, he went down in week 5 last year to a terrible ankle injury. He's now back, fully recovered, running around in practice, so everything looks fantastic for Dak Prescott right now. Some news we just recently got is that Michael Thomas is going to miss multiple weeks due to surgery he had on his ankle. His timeline is to miss 4 months, so right now you're looking at him coming back sometime in October. In October, you're going to be around a week 7 or week 8. He's definitely going to dive in drafts now. I could see him going into the 5th, 6th round. I think personally for me, If Michael Thomas ends up on my team injured, I'm taking him in round 6 or maybe even round 7, and I'm just going to stash him on my IR. Because at that point, I might like my roster construction where I can take that hope that Michael Thomas comes back midway through the season and then is that added boost to my fantasy team to just help lift me to the top. Or the devil's advocate of that is that he might not come off great off the injury and then might not be even worth the 6th or 7th round pick. And then just kind of is a roster clog on your team throughout the season. The good news is, though, if you take Michael Thomas, you can put him in your IR spot, which isn't going to count against your bench. And it's just basically an extra roster spot for players that physically can't play that you can just kind of keep. So if your league has injured reserve spots and you have more than one, Michael Thomas might be worth just keeping there as that extra bench spot you get because he's technically injured and can't play, so you can keep him on your team while still having your full bench. Or deep dives into the divisions, I'm trying to look at each position on each team in depth, examining kind of just what the offenses do and what their tendencies are. Longer episodes with more information and just knowledge to just talk about each player. And I'm going to try to give you a verdict of what I think on if you should want them on your team or not. So to start off with the leaders of the division last year, the Washington football team, 7-9, almost upset the Buccaneers in the wild card. At quarterback, you're looking at Ryan Fitzpatrick. Your running backs are Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick. Your main 2 wide receivers are Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. Your tight end is Logan Thomas. Last year, the team ranked 30th in offense, which is the 3rd worst. And they had the 2nd best defense, which is just kind of funny to have those 2 opposite ends of the spectrum. When it came to their play selection, and they had the 62-38 pass run split. They have the 15th hardest schedule for 2021, so that just kind of puts them right in the middle of the pack for difficulty. Speaking on their quarterback, Ryan Fitzpatrick. So he finished last year as the quarterback 28, only playing in 9 games because last year, even though he got off to a hot start, he only got to play in 9 games because he got benched for Tua Tagovailoa. So in those 9 games, he had 2,000 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, and 8 interceptions. He also added in a sneaky 151 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. So if you put that out to a 16 game pace, that would have equated to 3,700 yards, 24 passing touchdowns with 14 interceptions, 270 rushing yards, 3.5 touchdowns, which actually would have put him as the quarterback 13, so just outside quarterback 1 potential. His average last year was 16 points per game, had 232 passing yards, which would put him at a base of 9.3 points per game in fantasy. And he had 4 games over 20 points last year, a high of 27, but then he also had a low of 4.3. So he's coming into a situation where he's the bona fide starter. He's not a buffer for a new rookie quarterback. Last time he was a QB1 for fantasy was 2015 when it was his good year with the Jets when they went 10-6. He was the quarterback 11, throwing to Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. So the story of Ryan Fitzpatrick throughout his career is that he's had short stretches of dominance for fantasy. For remember, if you go back to 2019, weeks 12 through 17, he was the quarterback 3, averaging 24 points per game. He was also, in 2018, remember there was the year where he started the first 4 games. In weeks 1 through 3, he was the quarterback 1, averaging 32 points per game. So he's just like one of those guys that has these bursts of Fitzmagic, as the NFL likes to call him. But throughout the entire season, there might be a stretch where he just completely just throws interceptions and just totally crumbles. So my verdict for Ryan Fitzpatrick is you're not drafting him and you're leaving him in the stream. And you're picking him up if he's got just the right matchup. He's super fun to ride when you have that wave of Fitzmagic, but once that magic runs out, you really don't want to count on him a week in and a week out. So looking at the running back position, you've got Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissick. So last year, Antonio Gibson had this period where he's a breakout rookie running back, finished the year as the running back 12, averaging 13.2 points per game. He had 795 rushing yards and a very high touchdown rate, which may come down. He had 11 touchdowns last year. He added 36 receptions for 250 rushing yards. In his games played, he had 8 games over 10 points, high of 34.1 versus the Cowboys. He had 4 bust games under 10 points, but this was kind of when he He was kind of trying to take over that running back one role. There was, I can't remember his name, he had another running back in front of him. I think it was Payne Barber or someone. That might have just been a blast from the past, but he was trying to break into that running back one spot, which he clearly should. So right now he's slated to be running back one for 2021. So you just have to remember his stats were inflated last year by a high touchdown rate. That may see regression, but he still should get a bulk of carries as the main running back one. Your handcuff, J.D. McKissic, last year finished as the running back 24, which is super high for a handcuff. He had 9.5 points per game. He had 385 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. His big thing was he had 80 receptions for 589 yards, 2 touchdowns. He had 110 targets, which was 18% of the target share from that offense last year. So that's just abnormal reception totals due to the quarterback he was playing with. Alex Smith is a check down master in the passing game, but you have to remember Fitzpatrick doesn't check down. He checks it down the field to his receiver in triple coverage. So my verdict is you want to draft Gibson with mid RB1 potential. McKissic is going to be a late round handcuff if anything should happen to Gibson. McKissic will see an increased role, but because of the way he plays, the team will most likely sign a veteran running back or just lean on Lamar Miller, who's just still on that roster. Lamar Miller will probably take over the goal line work, and J.D. McKissic will do between the 20s. But this is the situation if Gibson unfortunately goes down. Looking at their 2 receivers, you have Terry McLaurin and Curtis Samuel. So Terry McLaurin finished last year as their wide receiver 21, averaging 12 points per game, took up 23% of the target share. But you have to remember his season. He started off strong and then got injured towards the back half of the year. Overall, he had 87 receptions, 1,118 yards, and 4 touchdowns. If he had a few more, he would have been a dominant wide receiver. He started off the season hot, got injured. He had 11 games over 10 points, having a high of 22, and only 4 games under 10 points, although at 2.4 versus a good defense while he was injured. So right now, with Ryan Fitzpatrick over-targeting his number 1 wide receivers, everyone is expecting Terry McLaurin to have a top 5 potential wide receiver, maybe at least a 5 through 10. So if he falls to you in the right spot in drafts, I highly recommend taking Terry McLaurin. The other wide receiver, stepping into the wide receiver 2 role, is Curtis Samuel, who's always been a wide receiver 3 in Carolina, but now has the ability to be a wide receiver 2 option. So last year, he finished as a wide receiver 25, averaging 11.6 points per game. He had a 17% target share from the Panthers, finished with 77 receptions, 850 yards at 3 touchdowns. But what's sneaky about Curtis Samuel is that he can be used out of the backfield. He had 200 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. And he's being reunited with Ron Rivera. But the thing is, when Ron Rivera was in Carolina, he used Curtis Samuel mainly as a deep threat, not as this gadget player that Ja Rule used him in Carolina as last year. So I think it'll be interesting to see what preseason shows us, to see what Curtis Samuel's role is in the football team's offense. And I'm interested in him in the background, just now knowing that he's a wide receiver 2 instead of a wide receiver 3 in his offense. So my verdict is, I would draft both if they get to you at the right spot. If you really believe in the breakout season from Terry McLaurin, you could draft him a little bit earlier in the 3rd round, but I'm happy where they both are in ADP right now. The tight end position, Logan Thomas. So last year, Logan Thomas had this incredible breakout season where he finished as the tight end 6, averaging 8.8 points per game, had 21% of the market share. In the last 11 games, he finished as the tight end 3. He had 72 receptions for 670 yards and 6 touchdowns. He had 9 games over 8 points, a high of 20.3 versus Pittsburgh, and 7 games under 8 points, which he had a low of 1.3 versus a very strong defense when everything just went wrong for the football team in that game. So I feel like all the things are lining up for Logan Thomas to have a good season, but you just have to remember that his good games came and his bad games was correlated to Antonio Gibson's production. In the games where Antonio Gibson had a good game or had a decent amount of rushing yards and maybe a touchdown, Thomas averaged 7.4. In games where Antonio Gibson was bad or was injured, Thomas averaged 11.2 because the team had to focus more on the passing game. You also have to remember is Ryan Fitzpatrick doesn't target the tight end like Alex Smith does. Just as a comparison, Fitzpatrick's years as a full starting quarterback, His tight end, his best year was 2019 when Mike Gesicki finished as the tight end 11. In 2015, his main tight end started as the tight end 82. And in 2016, his tight end was the tight end 51. Now, those 2 years, the offense didn't really focus on the tight end. They didn't have a great tight end. These are his years with the Jets. He's more of an open spread offense with 3 or 4 receivers instead of focusing on an elite tight end. Versus Alex Smith, whose tight end has been the tight end 1. His previous years as a starter, but that's when your tight end was Travis Kelce in Kansas City. So that's just 3 years of having the best tight end in the past few years when he was a starter. So my verdict is, you're going to draft late for that potential of him having a role in the offense, but I think you need to know that Ryan Fitzpatrick loves to target his receivers first, and if he's going to be potentially targeting a running back too, Logan Thomas is going to be the 3rd or 4th target typically in the offense instead of being the safety blanket that he was for Dwayne Haskins and Alex Smith. The next team on the list, the New York Giants, 6-10, missed playoffs. Quarterback Daniel Jones, running back Saquon Barkley and Devontae Booker, a crowded wide receiver room, and Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, and John Ross. Tight ends Evan Ingram and Kyle Rudolph. They have the 31st ranked offense last year, which is the 2nd worst in football, and the 12th ranked defense in 2020. They had a 59-41 pass run split. They have the 8th easiest schedule, though, coming into 2021. So speaking on the quarterback, Daniel Jones finished as the quarterback 24 last year. He had 2,943 passing yards, 11 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions, which is a terrible interception to touchdown ratio. Very sneaky on the ground, had 423 rushing yards and 1 touchdown, but he's known for fumbles. He had 11 last year and lost 6 of them. So he averages about 13.6 points per game, 210 passing yards, base of 8.4 points per game. But this is really Daniel Jones' last chance to prove that he can be the guy. Last year, they kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt with everyone, with losing Saquon, injuries, just not having the best wide receiver core. So they added Kenny Golladay in free agency. They added Kadarius Toney in the first round of the draft. This is the return of Saquon. So this is a prove-it year for Daniel Jones. So my verdict is, don't draft him. I want to see him do it on the field first with his new team before relying on him as my fantasy quarterback. So he's going to be a streamer in a good matchup, but it's a wait and see before you even think about putting Daniel Jones into your lineup. His running back coming back, Saquon Barkley. We all know who Saquon Barkley is, but if you don't, he's one of the superstar running backs in the NFL, but he just hasn't been able to stay on the field, even with his amazing talent and physical condition. So he did not play in 2020 and due to injury. He played in the first 1.5 games, but basically destroyed everything in his leg in the second game. And the 13 games from 2019, he played injured that year as well. He's running back 10. Had 1,000 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, finished with 52 receptions, 438 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So if you drafted him high that year and were in a 10 or 12 team league and really needed to depend on him to win you games, he probably cost you that season. But if you somehow got in the playoffs that year, he most likely won you the championship with his 41.2 performance versus the football team in the final championship week of most fantasy leagues. So he's still being drafted high based off really his memory and talent from his rookie year, where he finished as the RB2 behind Todd Gurley. So just talking about coming back of injury, just talking about it a little bit more as I mentioned earlier. So he's told the media that he's unsure of when he'll be ready to practice. We'll start the beginning of the season slow. The team has added also more weapons to the passing game, so that memory of him being one of the top pass catchers for the Giants in that RB2 season, very much reduced, probably even more reduced than what you might be thinking, because now you've paid Kenny Golladay and you've added Kadarius Toney. He's very similar to a gadget player. He also has a less talented quarterback. I still think that Eli Manning back during his rookie year, so this Saquon's rookie year, is still better than what Daniel Jones is now. Saquon Barkley, you're going to draft him late in the first round, and you just have to know that he's going to start the season off slow. So you might want to pair him with a good running back in the second round that's not coming off the season injured, who can just be the workhorse for your team while Saquon Barkley catches back up to speed. His handcuff, Devontae Booker. This guy had flashes for Denver and Las Vegas, the Broncos and the Raiders. But he's not going to take much of a workload from Saquon Barkley unless Saquon somehow gets injured again, which would be very unfortunate. But that's the reality of the NFL. So if I'm a Saquon Barkley owner, I might take Devontae Booker with my last pick in the draft, just in case Saquon gets re-injured again. Just Devontae Booker won't be the 3-down back. Then most likely will have someone else help him out if that does happen. But Devontae Booker is currently second on the depth chart, so you just have to be aware of his name during draft season. The wide receiver room: Kenny Golladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, Kadarius Toney, and John Ross in kind of quotations. So Kenny Golladay last year finished as the wide receiver 103. That's only because he played in 4 games and kind of goosed in another. So in those 4 games he played, I mean, the average is 9.2 because they include his goose in there, but so think of it more as a 10 or 11 points per game sort of deal. In Detroit, he had 18% of the target share. So in those 4 games that he did play, he had 20 receptions for 338 yards and 2 touchdowns, plus that 1 goose. So if you don't count that goose on a 16-game pace, that would have been 80 receptions for 1,352 yards, 8 touchdowns to be 223 points, which in a half PPR would have put him as the wide receiver 8, which is a lot better than the wide receiver 103. The problem is he's going from Matthew Stafford to Daniel Jones. So that's why he's really just fallen from a 3rd round pick all the way into the back of the 5th, even maybe mid 6th round. Just because fantasy owners, it's not that they don't like Kenny Golladay, it's just they don't like Daniel Jones as a quarterback. Other options right now is Sterling Shepard, who was wide receiver 46 last year, averaged 8 points per game, did miss 4 games though, had a 22% of the target share, 66 receptions for 656 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 5 games over 10 points, having a high of 29.6, which came in week 17, so kind of pointless. And 7 games under 10 points, a low of 4.5. On the other side, you had Darius Slayton, who was the wide receiver 55, averaged 5.7 points per game with an 18% target market share. He had 4 games over 10 points, a high of 25.2 in week 1. So he kind of pulled a Sammy Watkins on you and flashed brilliance and then disappeared for the rest of the entire season. He had 50 receptions for 750 yards and 3 touchdowns in 12 games under 10 points, including a goose. That's terrible as a wide receiver 2 or 3. So now that he's now the 3rd option in that offense, it's just Darius Slayton may be forgotten about in fantasy. The 4th guy on the list, Kadarius Toney, rookie from Florida, 1st round draft pick. In his last season, he had 70 receptions, 984 yards, 10 touchdowns. He's now coming into an offense that has a very crowded wide receiver room and not a super talented quarterback. So I think Kadarius Toney, he might have flashes of brilliance during the year, but he's not going to be someone you can depend on at the moment, week in and week out. He might even take a little bit of workload from Saquon on maybe some gadget plays. So he was going to be a guy that NFL commentators will let you know and just talk about it the entire game, but he's not going to have a significant role where he's going to produce enough for you for fantasy. John Ross, who honestly I don't even have on my sheet, his name is out there, former 1st round pick for Cincinnati, was just drafted purely based on his speed and talent. He was never able to really pull it together in Cincinnati. He's now maybe the 3rd or 4th best option in this crowded wide receiver room. So he's just a name from old at the moment. He might not do much. He might break away for a long touchdown out of nowhere in the middle of the season, but he's not someone you're going to be able to depend on either. Looking at their tight ends, you have Evan Ingram and Kyle Rudolph. So last year, Evan Ingram finished as the tight end 16, averaging 6.8 points per game, had a 21% target share, 63 receptions, 654 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 6 games over 8 points, a high of 13.3, and 10 games under 8 points, a low of 1.9. So he has only regressed from his rookie season where he finished as the tight end 6 with Eli Manning. Now the wide receiver room is so crowded, there's so many pass catchers with a less talented quarterback, that I think the script of Evan Ingram becoming an amazing fantasy tight end, I think it's kind of gone until Daniel Jones proves us otherwise. They've also added Kyle Rudolph, who finished as the tight end 40 last year, averaging 4.3 points per game with a 10% of the Minnesota target share. Missed 4 games, 28 receptions, 334 yards and 1 touchdown. So my verdict is to draft neither. Some will draft Evan Ingram based off of their memory of thinking he could have been an elite tight end. Though I think he's going to be more of a streamer this year. They'll most likely cut him after 2 or 3 weeks. Or they'll just keep him on their roster, thinking he's still good, but having the misconception that he could break out still, even though it's been several years since that breakout season and nothing has amounted from it. So coming up third in our division is the Dallas Cowboys, who went 6-10, missing playoffs. Right now, the quarterback is Dak Prescott, running backs Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, wide receivers Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup, tight end Blake Jarwin. They had the 14th ranked offense and the 24th ranked defense in 2020, had a 61-39 pass run split. They have the second easiest schedule of 2021, but they're also going to be hosted by Hard Knocks this year, so which means most of the Cowboy players will see a rise in ADP, just due to the media coverage and everyone seeing their faces right before teams are drafting. So their quarterback, Dak Prescott. As we remember, he was on this historic pace last year, but he had a season-ending injury in week 5. So for the first 4 weeks, he was the quarterback 1, averaging 31.3 points per game, which is just insane. He had 1,690 passing yards and 9 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, adding 86 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns in that span. So if you do a 16-game pace, that would have equated to 6,760 yards passing, 36 touchdowns, in addition to 344 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns, which would have been 500 fantasy points, which would have made him the quarterback 1 by over 95 points over Josh Allen. So as we remember, Josh Allen was the fantasy MVP last year. So just imagine if Josh Allen ran for an additional touchdown every single game on top of what he already did last year. That was the pace Dak was on. So if we go back to the year he wasn't injured, 2019, he was the quarterback 2, averaging 21.8 points per game. He had 300 passing yards per game, which kind of gives you a 12-point base. He's coming off an ankle injury. He's clear and healthy for camp. The videos of camp show him running around healthy. So my verdict is, draft him if you want him to go early quarterback strategy. Do not draft if you've taken a tight end already. It's one of those situations where you either draft a tight end early or you draft a quarterback early, because if you draft both early, then you're missing out on an important wide receiver or a running back that you need for the depth on your team, because you're starting more of those positions versus quarterbacks or tight ends. So looking at the running backs, you have Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. So Ezekiel Elliott last year finished as running back 11. While Dak was healthy, he started off the year as the running back 3, but of course the season went downhill once Dak got hurt. Averaged 13.2 points per game, was averaging 19.9 points per game with Dak Prescott. So on the year he had 979 rushing yards, 6 touchdowns, 52 receptions for 338 yards and 2 touchdowns. Last year Zeke did have a fumbling problem, and that kind of doubled down the bad sentiment of him having a bad year and also fumbling. And he's kind of fallen to the back half of the first round of drafts because of this. He had 4 games over 10 points without Dak and 6 games under 10 points because Dak wasn't there, so the defense could just stack the box, knowing that all the team had was Ezekiel Elliott and their quarterback just couldn't get it done to their wide receivers. Their other running back, Tony Pollard, finished as the running back 41, averaging 6.7 points per game. He's a high-value handcuff. He had 3 games over 10 points last year, 28.2 in his start versus the San Francisco 49ers. He's one of those guys where if something happens to Zeke, the workload will be given to Tony Pollard, so that's why he's a little bit more valuable than the other handcuffs. He's going in the 10th and 9th round just because people know that he could still have a decent game even if Zeke is on the field in case he vultures a touchdown from Zeke. Or if something does happen to Zeke, he's an instant running back 1 in people's eyes. So you need to be aware of Tony Pollard. If you're the Zeke owner, you need to spend that 10th or 11th round pick to make sure Tony Pollard gets on your bench, because you don't want to be losing that level of production on a team this efficient to someone else in your league. So wide receivers, you got Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. So last year, Amari Cooper was the wide receiver 16, averaging 11.9 points per game. He had a 21% target share. He had 92 receptions, 1,114 yards, and 5 touchdowns. While Dak was playing, he was the wide receiver 3. Over the year, he had 12 games over 10 points, having a high of 27.4. That's an amazing game versus the Browns. and they ended 4 games under 10 points, a low of 1.3. He's currently on the PUP list, which is physically unable to perform, with an ankle injury, but no news has come out in regards to it affecting his season. So I think it'd be fine. If he dips in drafts because of this, I'd buy that dip, because if I go super running back heavy and take a tight end, I'd love Amari Cooper as my wide receiver 1 or even my wide receiver 2. Another option is CeeDee Lamb, who was a wide receiver 20 last year, averaging 11.3 points per game, had an 18% target share, finished the year with 74 receptions for 935 yards and 5 touchdowns. This was his rookie season. He had 7 games over 10 points, a high of 22.7, and 9 games under 10 points. He literally had a game where he only had 0.1 fantasy points. So most rankings already have him projected to break out like Calvin Ridley did last year and Chris Godwin the year before. He's that perfect wide receiver 2 in a heavy offense. Everyone's looking forward to his breakout. In my opinion, I don't want him as my first wide receiver off the board, because if he doesn't break out, he's going to be very frustrating as your first wide receiver. If you're in a position where you get him as your wide receiver 2, I think that's perfect, because if he breaks out, he's a tremendous help to your team. But if he doesn't break out, you're not struggling to find out who's going to be your wide receiver 1 throughout the rest of the season. The third option in that offense right now, Michael Gallup, wide receiver 38, averaged 9 points per game last year, 59 receptions for 843 yards and 5 touchdowns, 4 games over 10 points, having a high of 27.1, had 12 games under 10 points, including a goose. Last year, Michael Gallup was used only on the outside. He didn't have a single route run inside the slot. So there's rumors he may see a few more targets in the slot this year. But for me, my verdict is you're going to draft Cooper, you're going to draft Lamb, and Gallup is going to be a late wide receiver 2 that has upside if he catches a few touchdowns in the game. But I'm not targeting him in drafts, even though he does have the potential to have a few good games throughout the season. And it's basically a very loaded offense. Could easily support 3 receivers with over 1,000 yards with the way they have to play with how bad their defense is. But my money would be on Cooper and Lamb. I'm still unsure about Michael Gallup as a consistent person you could trust in your lineup. Their tight end, Blake Jarwin. So everyone was expecting him to break out last season, but he went down to an ACL season-ending injury in week 1. Dalton Schultz replaced him and finished as the tight end 14. Dalton Schultz was the tight end 8 with Dak. So Blake Jarwin could have done even better than that. Dalton Schultz's season was 63 receptions for 615 yards and 4 touchdowns. So Blake Jarwin, he's coming off the ACL injury, and CeeDee Lamb has already established himself as a solid passing option in that offense. So my verdict is I'm not banking on a breakout season for Jarwin, just because Lamb has already kind of taken that role that we all kind of wanted Blake Jarwin to have last year. So I think Blake Jarwin could be a valuable streamer in a very pass-forward offense. You could take him super late in drafts with the upside, but I'm not taking Blake Jarwin thinking he could have a top 5 tight end potential. I'd rather just bet on another tight end that is easily the second option in their offense versus Blake Jarwin, who might be the 4th or 5th option in his offense. Rounding out the bottom of this division, the Philadelphia Eagles, who went 4-11 and 1, missing playoffs. Going into 2021, their quarterback is Jalen Hurts, running back Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, and free agent acquisition Kerryon Johnson. Wide receivers are Jalen Reagor, Devontae Smith, and Travis Fulgham. At tight end, you've got Dallas Goedert, and Zach Ertz is still there. Last year, they had the 24th ranked offense and 19th ranked defense. Had a 62-38 pass run split, so a little bit more pass heavy. They have the easiest schedule going into 2021 and have a new offensive coordinator coming over from the Colts. So Jalen Hurts finished as the quarterback 35 in 2020, started in only 4 games. Had 919 passing yards, 5 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions, 272 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns, and 6 fumbles. So in a 16-game pace, that would have projected him to do 3,676 yards, 20 passing touchdowns to 16 interceptions. But the more important side is he would have had 1,088 rushing yards and 12 rushing touchdowns. So that's 380 points, which would have been 23.75 points per game, would have made him the quarterback 5. In those games, he had 229 passing yards per game, which is a base of 9.1 points, posts an average of 6.8 rushing points per game, which is a nice base of 15, 16 points. The thing is, it's a small sample size. We only saw him as a starter for 4 games. 3 of those 4 games were versus good defenses, though, the Saints, Cardinals, and football team. His big game was 37 points versus Arizona. Everyone kind of looks at Jalen Hurts as the potential next Lamar Jackson-esque in the NFL. So if you want to go back to Lamar Jackson's rookie season, 2018, he had his playoff premiere. We had 194 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 54 rushing yards. That's 21 points. But in 2019, his MVP season in fantasy, he was going late in drafts because people were scared to take someone who they didn't know the potential of. He was the quarterback 18 off of drafts boards at an average position at 133. This year, the difference is people were projecting Jalen Hurts to have a breakout season already. They're not scared of it. So Jalen Hurts is going as the quarterback 9 off the board right now at an ADP of 87. So this is your back end of the 8th, 9th round for Jalen Hurts. So my verdict is draft reluctantly if you have a good team construction already. And even though you shouldn't draft backup quarterbacks in fantasy, I might be tempted to just in case Jalen Hurts doesn't pan out to what we all want him to be. I might just go quarterback and take Jalen Hurts, Tom Brady, or Jalen Hurts, Ryan Tannehill to have a quarterback I know I can count on. Because if Jalen Hurts fizzles out, no one's going to want him. So I'd much rather just cut Jalen Hurts and then fall back to a dependable quarterback instead of being just there with Jalen Hurts and then streaming every single week if he doesn't pan out to what I expect him to be. So I think if you're in an 8-team or 10-team league, you could take Jalen Hurts and then draft a reliable backup. But if you're in a 12-team or 14-team league, you're risking a lot drafting Jalen Hurts on what he might be able to do. Now, it's one of those situations where if you're a Jalen Hurts truther, draft him because you're going to anyway. But if you're very reluctant about the Eagles' offense and what their situation might be, I'd much rather a Tom Brady or Ryan Tannehill a round later or 2 than putting all my eggs into the basket of Jalen Hurts. So the running backs are Miles Sanders, Kenneth Gainwell, and Kerryon Johnson. So Miles Sanders was supposed to have a breakout season last year and then finished as the running back 23. Averaged 13 points per game, 867 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns, 28 receptions for 197 yards. So the biggest thing against Miles Sanders is that he really can't catch. He's a terrible receiving back. So there was a hope that the run game will improve with Jalen Hurts, a more mobile quarterback. So that is your upside to Miles Sanders. But I think the team has said that they want someone who can definitely take over the third down back. That's why they drafted Kenneth Gainwell, who is the best rookie pass catcher in the college ranks. That's why they wanted him. They got him in the 5th round. They also added Kerryon Johnson as depth. Kerryon Johnson did have the potential to be talented in Detroit, but that's never came through due to injuries. So I think when you're looking at all 3 of these running backs, I'm just avoiding Miles Sanders outright. Unless he somehow falls into the 5th round and I don't have a running back 2 yet, I think that's the only situation where Miles Sanders ends up on my team. Kenneth Gainwell will be interesting to watch. I don't know if the team will produce enough to just be playing handcuffs. If something was to happen to one of these 2 guys, Kerryon Johnson would be the next man up, but he's nothing more than a talented handcuff and a what could have been story. Their wide receiver room, you've got Jalen Reagor, Travis Fulgham, Devontae Smith. So Jalen Reagor was the 1st round draft pick of the previous year, finished as the wide receiver 88, averaging 6.5 points per game. He had a 13% target share. And the biggest mess up in that draft was that the Eagles took Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson, who the Vikings got. Reagor finished as the wide receiver 88. Justin Jefferson finished as the wide receiver 6. So Reagor's season, he had 31 receptions, 396 yards, and 1 touchdown. A disappointing season while also missing 5 games due to injury. The other wide receiver who broke out for a little bit out of nowhere was Travis Fulgham, who finished the year as the wide receiver 56. Averaged 7.5 points per game, a 14% target share on the year, 38 receptions for 534 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now what made Travis Fulgham really interesting for fantasy last year was he was the wide receiver 1. So that's better than DeAndre Hopkins, better than Devontae Adams, better than who all the other options were. He's the wide receiver 1 from weeks 4 to 8, while being the only non-injured option in Philadelphia, because you had Rager was injured, Alshon was injured, Deshaun was injured, Ertz was injured. It was just Travis Fulgham, who Hurts hyper-targeted during that stretch. Once they came back from bye and everyone returned to the team, he was the wide receiver 127 from weeks 10 through 17. So Travis Fulgham didn't just take a step down, he completely fell off a map once there were more options there. So now I believe he's most likely the wide receiver 2 option in Philadelphia now, so he might have a wide receiver 2 kind of year. I'm still not drafting him just because I don't really know what the offense is going to look like at the moment. The only one I want to draft is third on the list, Devontae Smith, who's the rookie they took in the first round of the draft this year. Heisman winning wide receiver, dominated at Alabama where he had 117 receptions, 1,856 yards, and 23 touchdowns through the air. The good news is he played with Jalen Hurts while he was at Alabama, so there is some sort of connection and chemistry already there. So I think you are going to expect him to be taking over the wide receiver 1 role for the Eagles. So my verdict would be, you're drafting Devontae Smith in that 7th, 8th round for the potential of him being the wide receiver 1 on the offense. Travis Fulgham and Jalen Reagor will most likely be streamers that you pick up if something does happen or there's a good matchup to be exploited. So the last 2 guys we're going to talk about today are Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. So Dallas Goedert last year finished as the tight end 7 with 9.3 points per game and a 14% target share. He did miss 5 games, ending the season with 46 receptions for 524 yards and 3 touchdowns. He had 4 games over 8 points, a high of 20.1, and 7 games under 8 points, a low of 1.2. To me, Dallas Goedert really feels like Hunter Henry or Evan Ingram of years past, where he's a talented player, he should have a good role in the offense, but the numbers never come. I'm kind of too scared to take Dallas Goedert where he is in drafts. I'd much rather get a solid depth piece at wide receiver and take a late round tight end if I haven't taken a tight end already. Then you also have Zach Ertz, who finished as the tight end 42 last year, who was drafted as the tight end 4, averaged 4.3 points per game, had an 18% target share, missed 5 games as well. Everyone thought he was going to be traded at the end of last season, but he's still with the team. He had 36 receptions for 335 yards and 1 touchdown. He had 2 games over 8 points, a high at 10.5, and 9 games under 8 points at a low of 1.1. Carson Wentz is gone, who loved to target his tight ends. Now you have Jalen Hurts. So in the 4 games Hurts was the starter, the tight ends combined for 21 receptions on 40 targets for 246 yards, which is 6.1 points per game at that position, which isn't really that great. So my verdict is I'm avoiding both on the team. If they're both on the team, I don't want either. If it's just Goddard, then he could be that mid to late round guy you could take a chance on if you already like your fantasy team's construction. But if I really need a wide receiver or I really need a running back 3 on my team, I'm not taking Dallas Goedert over one of those 2 important positions. So to wrap everything up, one of the things to do is follow the news. Don't listen to the camp stories about players being hyped up. Coaches are going to do that all the time. You really just want to look at who's playing with the ones, who's going to get the most reps, not what the coaches are saying, because coach speak can always be different than what's happening on the field. It's an important time in the mock draft because now that guys are getting injured, coach speak is pumping guys up the board. The boards are going to be different, moving up and down, so you kind of want to have a good idea of where players are now and how you value them and how the news that's going to be coming out is affecting their draft positions, because guys you want could be boosted up too far where you don't want them anymore, or guys you don't want might fall back into the draft board and become more interesting to you. So, as always, pay attention to the news, and I'll see you guys later until the next episode, where we're going to be talking about the NFC West. So, till then, guys, stay tuned. I don't know how to end this as always, so cheers to my imaginary beer.